Stop being a reactor. Become the observer. Why do the same problems keep showing up in your life? Why do you feel triggered by the same things over and over? Here's what most people miss. You can't solve a problem from inside the problem. There's a consciousness shift that happens when you learn to watch yourself instead of being yourself. And 3 neuroscientists have proven this shift literally rewires your brain in measurable ways. So what does this shift actually look like? The moment you step back and witness your own thoughts and emotions, you exit the old reality and enter quantum possibility. Most people spend their entire lives trapped inside their problems, reacting to circumstances completely identified with their thoughts and emotions. They don't realize there are 2 levels of existence, the one living life and the one watching it unfold. And here's why this matters for you today. I'm going to show you the exact neuroscience proving that observation physically rewires your brain in minutes, the 5-step protocol that activates witness consciousness instantly, and how mastering this state gives you complete freedom from all limiting patterns. This isn't just spiritual theory. There are breakthrough scientific discoveries that prove observation literally changes your brain in real time. Your problems only exist because you're identified with them. I'll show you how becoming the observer returns your power. I want to share something with you that took me years to understand, and when I finally got it, everything shifted. The reason you feel stuck in the same patterns, triggered by the same situations, overwhelmed by the same emotions, isn't because there's something wrong with you or because life is uniquely difficult for you. It's because of where you're standing in relation to your experience. Think about it this way. When you say, "I am anxious," you've become the anxiety itself. There's no separation, no space, no room to breathe. The anxiety is you, and you are the anxiety, and from that position, there's nowhere to go. You're trapped inside the experience, completely fused with it, and any attempt to change it feels like trying to escape your own skin. This is what I call identification. And it's the invisible prison most people live in without ever realizing there's a door. But something remarkable happens when you shift just a few degrees in perspective. When you pause and notice, "I'm noticing anxiety arising," suddenly there are 2 things present: the anxiety and the you who is aware of the anxiety. Can you feel the difference in those words? One collapses you into the emotion. The other creates space around it. That space, tiny as it might seem at first, changes everything. I remember the first time I really experienced this shift. I was in the middle of a familiar spiral of worry, completely consumed by it, when something made me step back mentally and just watch what was happening. It was like I'd been standing with my nose pressed against a painting, seeing only chaotic brushstrokes, and suddenly I took 3 steps back and could see the whole picture. The worry didn't disappear, but I was no longer imprisoned by it. I was the awareness holding it, rather than being held by it. This is what I mean when I talk about the 2 levels of existence that operate simultaneously in your experience. There's the character in the story, the one who goes through the events of your life, feels the emotions, has the reactions, encounters the challenges. This is the experiencer, but there's also the awareness watching the story unfold, the consciousness that notices the character and everything happening to them. This is the witness. Most people spend their entire lives completely identified with the character, never realizing the witness exists. They believe they are their thoughts, they are their emotions, they are their circumstances. When something triggers them, they don't see it as a trigger. They experience it as an attack on who they fundamentally are. When an emotion arises, they don't observe it, they become it entirely. But here's what's so beautiful and so liberating. You can shift between these 2 levels at any moment. You can step out of the character role and into the witness position, and from that vantage point, everything looks different. The things that seemed overwhelming when you were inside them become manageable when you're watching them. The emotions that felt permanent and defining when you were fused with them reveal themselves as temporary visitors when you're observing them pass through. Think of it like being in a movie theater. When you're the character in the story, it's like being on the screen, completely caught up in the drama with no awareness that it's a movie at all. But when you're the witness, you're sitting in the audience, still engaged with the story, still feeling its emotional impact, but aware that you're watching something unfold rather than being trapped inside it. This shift from identification to witnessing is what returns your power. Because once you can observe something, you're no longer at its mercy. An emotion you're identified with controls you completely. An emotion you're witnessing is simply information about your inner state. A thought you believe you are determines your entire reality. A thought you're watching is just one possibility among many floating through your awareness. The beautiful paradox is that this shift doesn't require you to change anything about your circumstances, fix anything about yourself, or make anything different. It simply requires you to change your relationship to your experience by becoming aware of the awareness that's already there, watching everything unfold. But you might be wondering, is this just spiritual philosophy, or is there actual science behind how observation changes your brain? Before we get to that, let me give you something immediate. Here's your first practical exercise. The next time you feel a strong emotion today, anger, anxiety, excitement, whatever, pause for just 60 seconds and say out loud, "I notice emotion is present." Not "I am angry," but "I notice anger is present." Watch what happens. You'll feel an immediate shift, a tiny gap opening up between you and the emotion. That gap is your power returning. This one sentence can change your entire day. That 60-second exercise you just learned works because of something happening in your brain. And the science behind why observation has this power is absolutely fascinating. 3 neuroscientists have made breakthrough discoveries that prove that watching yourself literally rewires your brain in minutes. You're not stuck with your brain's patterns. When I first learned about the neuroscience behind what we've been discussing, I felt this profound sense of relief and validation. For so long, this practice of witnessing had felt like something ethereal, something I couldn't quite explain or justify to the more analytical parts of my mind. But then I discovered that scientists have been measuring exactly what happens in the brain when we shift from identification to observation, and the results are remarkable. What these researchers found isn't just interesting theory. It's measurable, observable change happening in real time inside your brain. And knowing this can give you confidence that what you're practicing isn't just wishful thinking or spiritual bypassing. It's engaging with actual neural mechanisms that have the power to reshape how your brain processes experience. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, a research psychiatrist at UCLA, spent years studying people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and what he discovered has profound implications for all of us. He found that when people simply observed their obsessive thoughts without acting on them, just watching them as mental events rather than identifying with them as truth, their brain patterns literally began to change. Using brain imaging technology, he could see neural pathways reorganizing themselves through the act of mindful attention alone. What fascinated me most about his work is the timeline. We're not talking about years of therapy or decades of meditation. He documented measurable changes in brain activity within weeks, and initial shifts could be observed in individual sessions. The key was what he called self-directed neuroplasticity, the idea that by consciously directing your attention to observe rather than react, you're actively participating in rewiring your own brain. You're not waiting for something external to fix you. You're engaging the brain's natural ability to reorganize itself through the quality of your awareness. Then there's Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, whose research has transformed how we understand emotional regulation. He used functional MRI technology to observe what happens in the brain when people practice witnessing their emotions rather than being swept away by them. What he found was striking. When you observe an emotion rather than identifying with it, there's increased activation in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain associated with higher-order thinking, perspective-taking, and emotional regulation. This matters because it means witnessing isn't just a mental trick or a way of pretending emotions don't affect you. It's actually engaging a different neural network, one that gives you more capacity to respond rather than react. When you're fused with an emotion, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, tends to be in the driver's seat. But when you step into the observer position, you're activating the prefrontal regions that can hold emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You're literally shifting which part of your brain is primary in the moment. Dr. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist who studies meditation and consciousness, has contributed another crucial piece to this puzzle. His research shows that practices involving self-observation and meta-awareness, that quality of being aware that you're aware, actually decrease activity in the amygdala, the brain region responsible for fear and stress responses. Even more interesting, these changes can happen quite quickly. People new to witnessing practices showed measurable shifts in amygdala reactivity after just a few sessions. What this tells us is that the observer state isn't just psychologically different from the identified state. It's neurologically different. Your brain is literally functioning in a different mode, with different regions active and different patterns of connectivity between areas. And the more you practice moving into observer consciousness, the more readily your brain learns to access this state. What strikes me most about all this research is how it validates something people have known experientially for thousands of years through contemplative practices. The ancient wisdom about witnessing consciousness wasn't just philosophy. It was describing a real neurological capacity that we all have. And now we can measure it, study it, and understand the mechanisms through which it works. Now that you understand the neuroscience, the question becomes, how do you actually activate this observer state in the moment when you need it most? I'm going to walk you through the 5-step protocol that shifts you from reactor to observer. You can start using this today. Now that you understand both the concept and the science, you're probably wondering how to actually do this in real life, especially in those heated moments when you're already triggered and everything feels overwhelming. I want to share with you the exact process I use and that I've taught to countless others who've found it genuinely transformative. What I love about this protocol is that it's simple enough to remember even when you're stressed, yet profound enough to create real shifts in how you experience life. The first step is learning to notice the identification when it's happening. This is about catching yourself in the act of fusing with your thoughts or emotions. The telltale sign is the language you use, especially in your internal dialogue. When you find yourself thinking or saying, "I am anxious," and "I am angry," and "I am stuck," "I am not enough," that's identification. You've collapsed your entire sense of self into a temporary state or thought. In that moment, you believe you are the anxiety, you are the anger, you are the limitation. This is the trap, and the first step to freedom is simply recognizing when you've fallen into it. Don't judge yourself for it. We all do this constantly. Just start noticing. You might catch it in the moment, or you might notice it hours later when reflecting on your day. Either way, that noticing is the beginning of change. You're developing what I call pattern recognition, where you start to see your habitual ways of identifying with experiences. Once you've noticed the identification, the second step is to create the gap. This is where the magic starts to happen, and it's remarkably simple. You shift your internal language from "I am" to "I notice." Instead of "I am anxious," you gently reframe it to "I notice anxiety is present," or "I notice anxious thoughts arising." Can you feel how different that is? In the first version, you and the anxiety are one. There's no space, no separation. In the second version, there's a you that's noticing and there's an anxiety that's being noticed. Suddenly, there are two things where before there was only one. This linguistic shift might seem small, but it creates a genuine psychological and even neurological change. You're activating that observer consciousness we talked about, engaging different neural networks, stepping back from the immediacy of the experience. Sometimes I'll even add more specificity. I notice tightness in my chest and thoughts about tomorrow's meeting. This gets me even more into the observer position, describing what I notice rather than drowning in it. The third step is to watch without judgment. And this is where many people stumble because our conditioning is to immediately evaluate everything as good or bad, right or wrong. But the observer doesn't judge. It simply sees. When you notice anxiety, anger, sadness, or any other state, practice just watching it the way you might watch clouds moving across the sky. You don't judge clouds as good or bad, you simply observe them passing. Try to bring that same quality of neutral attention to your inner experience. This doesn't mean you pretend the experience doesn't matter or that you're not affected by it. It means you're holding it in awareness without adding the extra layer of judgment that usually makes difficult emotions even harder. You might notice yourself starting to judge, "I shouldn't feel this way," or "this is bad." And when you catch that, gently redirect to simple observation. What does this actually feel like in your body? What thoughts are present? What's the quality of this experience? Stay curious rather than critical. The fourth step takes you even deeper into the observer state. Ask yourself, who is observing these thoughts? Who is noticing these emotions? This inquiry reveals something profound. If you can watch your thoughts, you can't be your thoughts. If you can observe your emotions, you can't be your emotions. There's an awareness present that's doing the observing, and that awareness is more fundamental than any passing mental or emotional state. Some people find this question opens up a sense of spaciousness or stillness. Others discover a quality of consciousness that feels unchanging, even as everything else shifts. You don't need to find a perfect answer to this question. The asking itself creates the shift, pointing you toward the witness that's always been there, quietly watching everything unfold. The fifth and final step is to embody the observer power by acting from this witness state rather than from your reactive patterns. This is where the practice moves from inner work to outward expression. When you're grounded in observer consciousness, you can choose your response rather than being hijacked by automatic reactions. You might notice anger arising, acknowledge it, observe it, and then consciously decide how you want to respond, maybe with calm communication rather than lashing out. You might observe anxiety about a decision and then make the choice from a place of centered awareness rather than from fear. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or detached. It means you act with intention rather than compulsion, with awareness rather than unconsciousness. Over time, this becomes more natural, and you'll find yourself spontaneously responding from the observer state in situations that used to completely overwhelm you. You now have the complete 5-step protocol to help this become automatic rather than something you have to remember. Tonight, before bed, take 2 minutes to write down 3 moments from today where you reacted automatically. Just 3. Don't judge them. Simply observe them on paper. Next to each one, write what you would notice if you were the witness instead of the reactor. For example, I reacted with frustration when traffic was slow becomes, I noticed frustration arising about traffic. This simple practice trains your brain to default to observer mode. Do this for just 3 days, and you'll notice you're catching reactions in real time. When you practice this evening reflection consistently, even just for a few days, something extraordinary starts to happen. You begin catching yourself in reactive mode faster and faster. And eventually you reach what I call the breakthrough state. Here's the breakthrough. When you master witnessing, emotions and circumstances lose their power to control you. There comes a point in this practice when something fundamental shifts, and I want to prepare you for what that feels like so you'll recognize it when it arrives. It's not that you suddenly become immune to emotions, or that life stops presenting challenges. Rather, your relationship to these experiences transforms in a way that's hard to fully explain until you've tasted it yourself. The breakthrough happens when you realize at a deep experiential level that nothing can truly control you when you're watching it. Not because you're suppressing it or pretending it doesn't exist, but because observation itself creates a kind of natural freedom. When you're identified with anger, the anger controls you completely. It determines what you say, what you do, how you interpret everything around you. But when you're watching anger move through your system, you maintain your autonomy. You can feel the heat of it, notice the thoughts it generates, observe the physical sensations, and still choose how to respond. I remember the first time I truly experienced this with a relationship that had always triggered deep insecurity in me. For years, certain behaviors from this person would send me spiraling into reactivity, defensive, anxious, trying to control the situation. But after months of practicing the observer protocol, something different happened. The trigger arose as it always had, but this time I caught it immediately. I watched the familiar pattern of insecurity begin to activate, observed the thoughts forming, noticed the tightness in my chest, and in that watching, I remained free. The emotion was there, real and present, but it no longer owned me. I could feel it without becoming it. This is what I mean by mastery. Not that you transcend emotions or rise above the human experience, but that you discover a part of yourself that remains untouched by whatever passes through. The witness consciousness is inherently stable. It watches storms without being destroyed by them, observes turbulence without being thrown off balance. Every emotion, every thought, every circumstance becomes information rather than identity, weather passing through rather than who you are. What's liberating about this state is that you stop trying to change your thoughts or fix your emotions through force. You've probably spent years attempting to think more positively, feel more confident, or be less anxious through sheer effort. And perhaps you've noticed how exhausting and ultimately ineffective that approach is. The breakthrough comes when you realize you don't need to change these things. You need to change your relationship to them. When you're observing anxiety rather than being anxiety, it naturally has less grip. Not because you've fought it, but because you've stopped feeding it with identification. This shift extends beyond emotions into circumstances as well. Situations that once felt overwhelming, a difficult conversation, a financial challenge, an uncertain future, begin to feel more workable when you can observe your reactions to them rather than being completely consumed by those reactions. You develop what might be called psychological flexibility, the ability to be present with difficult experiences without being defined by them. The ultimate implication of mastering the witness state is a kind of invincibility, not in the sense that nothing can hurt you, but in the sense that nothing can trap you in unconscious reactivity. You always have access to the part of yourself that can step back and observe, and from that position you always have choice. This breakthrough leads to understanding the most profound principle of how consciousness and reality interact, the reality observation effect. Your sustained attention doesn't just observe reality, it rewires your perception and transforms what you experience. I want to share something with you that might sound almost too simple to be true, yet it's one of the most powerful principles I've encountered. Where you place your attention literally shapes what you perceive, and what you perceive becomes your experienced reality. This isn't mysticism or wishful thinking. It's how your brain fundamentally works, and understanding this changes everything about how you engage with your life. Your brain receives far more sensory information every moment than it could possibly process consciously. Right now, there are countless sounds, sights, sensations, and stimuli in your environment, but you're only aware of a tiny fraction of them. Your attention acts like a spotlight, illuminating certain aspects of your experience while leaving others in shadow. What neuroscience has revealed is that this isn't a passive process. Your sustained attention actually strengthens the neural pathways associated with whatever you're focusing on, while pathways associated with ignored information become weaker over time. This means that when you consistently focus your attention through the lens of the observer, rather than through the filter of reactivity, you're literally training your brain to perceive differently. If you habitually scan your environment for threats and problems, your perceptual system becomes increasingly tuned to detect exactly those things. You'll notice every potential danger, every slight, every difficulty, because that's what your attention has trained your brain to prioritize. Conversely, when you practice observing from a state of curious awareness rather than defensive reactivity, your perception gradually shifts to include more nuance, more possibility, more of the neutral or positive aspects of experience that were always there but filtered out. The mechanism behind this is fascinating. Your brain doesn't simply record reality like a camera. It actively constructs your experience based on predictions and patterns learned from past attention. When you shift from identified consciousness to observer consciousness, you're literally accessing different neural networks that process information differently. The observer state, as we discussed earlier, engages prefrontal regions associated with broader perspective and emotional regulation, while the identified state tends to activate more primitive threat response systems that narrow perception and amplify reactivity. What this creates is a feedback loop between your consciousness and your experience. When you approach life from observer consciousness, you perceive more options, more space, more possibility in situations that would have seemed fixed or threatening from the identified state. And because you're perceiving differently, you respond differently. Your different responses then create different outcomes and interactions, which in turn reinforce the observer state. It's not that you're magically creating a new external reality. It's that you're engaging with the reality that's always been there in a fundamentally different way. And that shift in engagement genuinely transforms your lived experience. I've watched this play out in my own life in countless ways. There was a period when I was convinced I was surrounded by critical, judgmental people. Everywhere I went, I perceived criticism and negativity. But as I deepened my observer practice, something remarkable happened. I started noticing that many of these same people were also expressing kindness, curiosity, and support. Those qualities had been there all along, but my attention, filtered through defensive identification, simply hadn't registered them. As my perceptual lens shifted, my responses shifted, and gradually, my relationships began to feel completely different. Not because everyone around me changed, but because I was perceiving and engaging with a fuller picture of what was actually present. This is why fighting your current reality rarely works, while observing yourself in relationship to reality creates genuine transformation. When you fight what is, you're reinforcing the very perceptual patterns and neural pathways that created your limited experience in the first place. You're operating from identification, from reactivity, from the narrow lens that can only see what's wrong. But when you step into observer consciousness, you're engaging different neural machinery that has access to a broader view. You're not denying difficulty or pretending challenges don't exist. You're seeing them within a larger context that includes possibility, choice, and your own agency in how you respond. The profound implication is that transformation doesn't begin with changing external circumstances. It begins with changing the quality of consciousness you bring to whatever circumstances exist. And that shift in consciousness naturally leads to shifts in perception, which lead to shifts in response, which ultimately do create different outcomes in your actual lived experience. This understanding of how attention transforms reality leads to a simple but powerful way to set your entire day. Instead of starting reactive, you can begin as the conscious observer from the moment you wake up. Tomorrow morning, before checking your phone, sit up in bed and say these words out loud. Today I am the witness. I observe my thoughts, I notice my emotions, and I choose my responses. Say it 3 times. Feel the shift in your energy. This 30-second practice sets your consciousness to observer mode for the entire day. The mornings you do this, you'll notice you're less reactive, more present, and reality seems to cooperate with you more easily. It's that simple. As we come to the close of this journey together, I want you to take a moment to let everything we've explored settle in. The shift from reactor to observer isn't just another technique to add to your collection. It's a fundamental reorientation to how you experience being alive. You are not your thoughts, emotions, or circumstances. You are the eternal witness observing them all. The moment you shift from being lost in the story to watching the story unfold, quantum possibilities open and reality reorganizes instantly. This understanding changes everything because it means you're never truly stuck. No matter how intense an emotion feels, how persistent a thought pattern seems, or how overwhelming circumstances appear, there's always a part of you that can step back and observe. That capacity for witnessing is your birthright, your refuge, and your power. It's been there all along, waiting for you to remember it exists. Master the witness state, and nothing can ever trap you again. You now have 3 immediate practices: the 60-second observer test for emotions, the evening observer journal for building awareness, and the morning observer declaration for setting your daily frequency. Start with just one. The one that resonates most is the right one for you. You don't need to do everything perfectly or all at once. Choose the practice that feels most accessible to you right now, in this moment. If you're someone who learns through real-time experience, the 60-second observer test might be your entry point. If reflection comes naturally to you, perhaps the evening journal calls to you. If you love rituals and fresh starts, the morning declaration might feel right. Trust your intuition here. There's no wrong choice. And here's something special. Comment below which of the 3 practices you're committing to start today. When you do, you'll activate accountability and I'll personally respond to guide you. Plus, seeing others commit creates quantum entanglement. We'll be observing together, which amplifies the effect. Your journey from reactor to observer starts the moment you declare your practice below.